The champagne flute shattered against the tiled floor of the Seville villa like a gunshot in the dead of night, shards scattering like the fragments of Elena's promises. Anastasia's hand trembled, the sting of betrayal hotter than the Andalusian sun that had baked these terracotta walls for centuries. You think I was just another notch on your bedpost, Elena? After everything, after I crossed an ocean for you. Elena's laugh was a cruel melody, echoing off the whitewashed arches of the courtyard, her perfectly manicured nails tracing the edge of her silk robe as if the wreckage at her feet were mere confetti from a party she'd already forgotten. She leaned against the wrought iron balustrade, the jasmine vines twisting around her like accomplices in her indifference, her dark eyes, once Anastasia's harbor, now cold as the Guadalquivir River at dawn. Oh, Anna, darling. Love's not a contract. It's a dance. And you? You stepped on my toes one too many times. Anastasia's chest heaved, the humid air thick with the scent of orange blossoms and unspoken regrets. But she wouldn't beg. Not here, in this rented paradise that had turned into a gilded cage. She grabbed her leather satchel from the mosaic table, the one Elena had bought her in Madrid as a gesture, and stormed through the heavy wooden doors, the slam reverberating like a final verdict. The cobblestone streets of the Triana neighborhood swallowed her footsteps, flamenco guitars wailing from distant bars like a soundtrack to her unraveling heart. That was 6 months ago. Back when Anastasia still believed in the fairy tale of two American dreamers chasing sunsets in Spain. She'd come here on a whim, fresh out of a dead-end graphic design gig in Brooklyn, lured by Elena's whispers of adventure, and a shared lease on life. Elena, with her venture capital sharpness and effortless charm, had painted Seville as their canvas, lazy afternoons in the Alcazar gardens, nights lost in the pulse of Feria de Abril. But the paint had peeled away, revealing the truth. Elena collected hearts like she did vintage espadrilles, pretty things to admire until the shine wore off. Now Anastasia trudged through the narrow alleys of Barcelona's Gothic quarter, the weight of her sketchbook heavier than the betrayal it chronicled. She'd fled south to north, trading Elena's suffocating embrace for the anonymity of Catalonia's shadows. At 28, with her freckled cheeks and that unruly auburn mane she could never quite tame, Anastasia looked every bit the displaced artist she was. Jeans faded from too many washes, a faded Met's cap pulled low over eyes that still stung from unshed tears. Barcelona suited her fractured soul. Chaotic, layered, full of hidden courtyards where secrets could hide. Her new gig was at a hole-in-the-wall cafe called La Serena, slinging cortados to tourists while doodling murals on napkins. It paid the rent on her tiny piso in El Born, a sliver of space with a balcony overlooking the Born market's iron skeleton. But survival wasn't thriving, and the gnawing emptiness Elena had left behind festered like an untreated wound. Friends back home texted platitudes. "You're better off, girl." But they didn't see the way Anastasia traced the empty side of the bed each morning, or how the scent of Elena's perfume still clung to her favorite scarf. It was on a rain-slick Tuesday, the kind where the Mediterranean mist turned the city into a watercolor blur, that fate or cruelty reintroduced Magnolia Reyes. Anastasia was wiping down the espresso machine when the bell above the door tinkled like a warning chime. In walked Magnolia, all sharp edges and unapologetic presence, her black hair slicked back from the downpour, brown eyes scanning the room like a predator assessing territory. At 29, she carried herself with the poise of old money laced with new fire, tailored blazer hugging her athletic frame, olive skin glowing under the cafe's amber lights, a silver cuff bracelet glinting on her wrist like armor. Their eyes locked, and Anastasia's stomach plummeted. Magnolia, the thorn in her side since art school in New York, where Anastasia's indie zines had clashed with Magnolia's polished installations at every campus critique. Sworn enemies, or so the rivalry went. Anastasia, the raw emotion scribbler. Magnolia, the conceptual queen bee whose grants Anastasia had bitterly envied. What the hell was she doing in Barcelona? And why did her presence suddenly make the air feel electric, charged with something far more dangerous than old grudges? "Anastasia Hale," Magnolia drawled, her voice a low Georgia lilt smoothed by years abroad, American roots twisted with Iberian flair. She shook the rain from her coat, droplets scattering like accusations. "As I live and breathe. Slumming it in Spain, huh? Last I heard, you were Elena's little shadow." The name hit like a slap. Anastasia gripped the counter, knuckles whitening. And last I heard, you were still buying your way into every gallery from here to Bilbao. What do you want, Reyes? A latte to go with your superiority complex. Magnolia's lips curved, not quite a smile, more a challenge. She slid onto a stool, legs crossing with deliberate grace. Make it a double. Black. And maybe an apology for that trash piece you called Fractured Vows back in 18. It tanked my funding pitch. Reviewers thought I was ripping you off. Anastasia's laugh was bitter, mechanical, as she frothed the milk she didn't need. Apology? For creating something real? Please. Your work's all smoke and mirrors, Mag. Pretty boxes hiding empty promises. She slammed the cup down, steam rising like her temper. But beneath the barbs there was a flicker. Magnolia's gaze held hers too long, too intently, stirring embers Anastasia had long since tried to drown. They bantered like adversaries at a duel, words slicing through the patter of rain outside. Magnolia was here on business, she said vaguely, curating for a high-end gallery in the Example, schmoozing collectors over cava and Catalan modernism. But as the cafe emptied, the conversation veered, unbidden, into the cracks. Elena's poison, you know, Magnolia said suddenly, stirring her coffee with unnecessary focus. I warned you in New York. She's got a trail of broken girls from Soho to Santorini. Anastasia's throat tightened. And you care because? So you can gloat. But her voice cracked, betraying the ache. Magnolia's hand, strong, callous from sculpting, brushed hers as she reached for the sugar. The touch lingered, a spark in the dim light, and for the first time in months, Anastasia didn't pull away. That night, alone in her piso, Anastasia couldn't sleep. The rain drummed against the shutters like insistent fingers, and her sketchbook filled with feverish lines. Magnolia's profile, fierce and unguarded, the curve of her jaw a cliffside begging to be mapped. It was madness. Hating her had been easy, a shield against vulnerability. But Barcelona, with its labyrinthine streets and whispered histories, had a way of blurring lines. By dawn, she convinced herself it was nothing. Just rain-fueled delirium. Yet Magnolia returned the next day. And the day after, her orders evolving from curt to companionable. They'd talk art until closing, Anastasia's passion for street murals versus Magnolia's precision in marble, and then wander the Barri Gothic, sharing churros dusted with sugar like fragile truces. One evening, under the stained glass glow of Santa Maria del Mar, Magnolia confessed her own fracture. A family legacy of expectation, her parents' Georgia plantation turned vineyard in Rioja, pressuring her to marry well, while she carved out space for her truth in a world that still whispered about women like them. You're not what I thought, Anastasia admitted one night, their shoulders brushing on a bench by the fountain of the Placa rail. The water's murmur softened the city's hum, fire performers juggling flames in the distance like distant warnings. Magnolia turned, her face illuminated by lantern light, eyes soft with something unspoken. And you're more, she replied, voice husky. Their fingers intertwined, tentative, and in that touch, the enmity dissolved like mist at sunrise. What bloomed was tentative, then torrid in its tenderness. A romance stitched from stolen moments. Mornings tangled in Anastasia's narrow bed, sunlight filtering through lace curtains as they traced each other's stories on skin. Afternoons in Magnolia's sun-drenched studio in Gracia, where Anastasia modeled for sketches that captured not just form, but the quiet fire in her gaze. They cooked paella on a hot plate, laughing over burned rice and shared bottles of Albarino, Magnolia's head on Anastasia's lap as they debated Gaudi's curves versus Pollock's chaos. For the first time, love felt like partnership, not performance. Magnolia listened when Anastasia spoke of her fears, of being unmoored, of art that never sold, of a heart too bruised to trust again. You're not adrift, Magnolia would murmur, pulling her close on cliffside walks along the Costa Brava, the sea a turquoise roar below. You're the current. And Anastasia believed her, in the way Magnolia's touch grounded her, steady as the Roman walls encircling the old city. But shadows lingered. Elena's ghost haunted the edges, late-night texts Anastasia deleted unread, a mutual friend spotting her at a gallery opening and spilling the news. Elena's back in town asking about you. Worse, Magnolia's silences grew, her phone buzzing with calls she dismissed as family. Anastasia chalked it up to distance, to the transatlantic pull that had snared them both. Yet doubt crept in, a vine tightening around her ribs. The first fracture came at an exhibition in the Macba, Barcelona's modern art mecca. Anastasia had submitted a piece, a mixed-media collage titled Echoes of Exile, layers of torn letters and ink washes evoking lost loves. Magnolia had encouraged her, even pulled strings for the slot. But as they mingled amid the white walls and whispered critiques, Elena appeared like a specter in red silk, her arm looped through a silver-haired collector's. Anastasia, Elena purred, air-kissing her cheeks with lips that still haunted dreams. Darling, you look resilient. This piece, it's us, isn't it? All that pretty pain. Her eyes flicked to Magnolia, sharpening like daggers. And who's this? Your rebound muse. Magnolia stiffened beside her, but Anastasia held her ground, voice steady. It's survival, Elena. Move on. Yet as Elena sauntered away, laughter trailing like smoke, Magnolia's grip on Anastasia's elbow tightened, possessive, almost pained. She's trouble, she muttered. Always has been. That night, in the afterglow of validation, her piece sold to a German buyer. Anastasia pressed Magnolia against the studio wall, kisses fierce with triumph. But Magnolia pulled back, eyes shadowed. We need to talk, she said, and the words landed like stones in still water. It poured out then, Magnolia's secret. She'd been approached by Elena months ago, back when Anastasia was still entangled in Seville's web. Elena, ever the opportunist, had dangled a collaboration, a joint show in New York, funded by her connections. I said no, Magnolia insisted, pacing the cluttered floor amid half-finished sculptures. But she implied things. About you. That you were unstable, that I'd be picking up scraps. Anastasia recoiled, the air between them thickening. And you didn't tell me? You let me walk into this blind. Hurt twisted into accusation. The old rivalry resurfacing like bile. Or was it strategy? Get close to the enemy, win the war. Magnolia's face crumpled, hands reaching out. No, Anna. God, no. This us, it's real. I was protecting you, waiting for the right moment. But the seed of doubt had taken root, and Anastasia fled into the night, the Ramblas neon blur a mockery of her clarity. Days blurred into a tense standoff. Anastasia threw herself into work, her napkins now etched with angular grief, while Magnolia's texts piled up. Pleas laced with poetry, quotes from Lorca about love's inevitable wounds. Elena, sensing blood, circled closer. A chance encounter at La Serena. Flowers delivered to the cafe with a note reading, Miss our dances? Let's talk. Anastasia burned the card, but the pull was there, insidious. Elena represented the familiar ache, the chaos she knew how to navigate. Magnolia? She was the unknown horizon, terrifying in its promise. The climax shattered on a stormy eve in late autumn, winds howling off the Balearics as if the sea itself mourned. Anastasia had agreed to meet Elena at a clandestine tapas bar in the Raval, the neighborhood's grit a fitting stage for reckoning. But as she sipped her vermouth, stealing for closure, the door swung open, and Magnolia stormed in, rain-soaked, eyes wild with betrayal's mirror. You came, Magnolia accused, voice breaking over the clatter of plates. Elena smirked from her corner booth, but it was Anastasia's gaze that pinned her. After everything, you came to her? Elena's intervention was velvet venom. Oh, let her go, Reyes. She's always been mine, wild, untamed. You? You're just the intermission. But Magnolia whirled on her, the air crackling. Stay the hell away from her. You don't get to toy with lives like they're your latest installation. Words escalated into revelations. Elena's web of manipulations laid bare. Her collaboration, a ploy to reclaim Anastasia through jealousy. Magnolia confessed the full truth. She'd rejected Elena not once, but twice, even threatening exposure of her predatory patterns to the art world. I couldn't lose you, she choked out, turning to Anastasia. Not to her lies, not to my fears. Anastasia stood, torn between the devil she knew and the woman who dared to rewrite her story. Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the rafters, and in that suspended breath she chose. Not with words but action, crossing the room to Magnolia, pulling her into a kiss that tasted of salt and storm, fierce and forgiving. Elena's exit was a whisper of defeat, her heels clicking into oblivion. In the aftermath, they rebuilt on cracked foundations. The betrayal had scarred, but it humanized them. Anastasia learned to voice her shadows, Magnolia to dismantle her walls. They co-curated a show in a forgotten warehouse by the port, Rivals Redeemed, blending Anastasia's raw strokes with Magnolia's sculpted silences. Critics called it revolutionary. To them it was redemption. As winter softened into spring, they walked the Sagrada Familia's spires, Gaudia's unfinished dream a metaphor for their own. "Love isn't a game," Anastasia murmured, Magnolia's hand warm in hers against the chill. "It's the unfinished masterpiece." And in Barcelona's eternal embrace, city of saints and sinners, they etched their happy incompleteness, two women who had turned enmity to eternity, proving that even in betrayal's wake, grace could bloom. The months following the storm in the Raval were a delicate mending, threads of trust rewoven with the patience of mosaic artists piecing together a shattered azulejo. Anastasia and Magnolia moved through Barcelona like ghosts of their former selves. Haunted but lighter, the weight of old wars lifted just enough to breathe. Their days fell into a rhythm as comforting as the chime of church bells at La Merce. Mornings in the kitchen, Anastasia's bare feet padding across cool tiles as she whisked eggs for tortilla española, Magnolia's laughter bubbling over the sizzle of olive oil, her arms encircling from behind in a hug that spoke of homecomings. Yet the scars itched. Anastasia caught herself scanning crowds for Elena's silhouette, a reflex born of survival. And Magnolia? Her phone still buzzed with echoes from Georgia, her mother's veiled barbs about settling down properly, her father's gruff silences that masked disappointment in a daughter who sculpted desires the family vineyard couldn't bottle. "It's nothing," she'd say, deleting voicemails with a flick, but Anastasia saw the flicker in her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed like bowstrings. They channeled it into creation. The warehouse show was their crucible, a cavernous space in Poblenou once humming with textile looms, now echoing with the ghosts of industry. Anastasia's collages dominated one wall, vast tapestries of recycled maps and love letters, edges frayed like heartlines, titled Cartographies of Collapse. Beside them, Magnolia's sculptures rose like sentinels, marble forms interlocking in precarious balance, voids carved where connections strained. Together they formed a dialogue, raw and resonant, drawing crowds that spilled onto the industrial docks, murmuring about the American duel-turned-duet. Opening night was electric, the air thick with the tang of Rioja and the low hum of intellectuals in linen suits. Anastasia, in a simple black shift that hugged her curves without apology, circulated with a glass of cava, her green eyes bright with nerves masked as poise. Magnolia, resplendent in emerald silk that echoed the sea, worked the room like a conductor, her lilt drawing donors like moths. But as the speeches wound down, a shadow slithered in. Not Elena but worse, Magnolia's past incarnate. Victoria Reyes swept through the doors like a dowager queen, pearls gleaming against a cashmere wrap, her silver-streaked hair coiled in disapproval. At 55, she was the epitome of Southern steel wrapped in Spanish lace. Widow to a magnate, guardian of legacies that demanded conformity. "Magnolia, darling," she cooed, voice honey over thorns, pulling her daughter into a perfunctory embrace. "This endeavor, charming if a bit bohemian. But New York's calling, that curator from MoMA? She's expecting you next month." Anastasia hovered at the periphery, sketchbook clutched like a shield, but Magnolia's laugh was forced, brittle. "Mother, meet Anastasia. My partner. In every sense." The word hung bold and unyielding, but Victoria's gaze appraised her like a flawed vase. Freckles too earnest, auburn hair too wild. "Charmed," she said, lips thinning. "Though I do hope this phase doesn't derail your prospects." The barb landed subtle as a stiletto. Anastasia excused herself to the loading dock, the night air sharp with salt from the nearby Bessos River. She lit a rare cigarette, a vice she'd kicked with Elena, watching sparks dance like fleeting hopes. Magnolia joined her minutes later, face stormy. "She's impossible. Always has been. Thinks love like ours is a detour, not the destination." Anastasia stepped out the smoke, turning to her. "And you? Do you ever wonder if she's right?" The question escaped unbidden, born of the evening's undercurrents. Magnolia's eyes widened, hurt flashing like lightning over the delta. "God, no. Anna, you're my North Star." But she chips away. Always has. They made love that night in the warehouse's alcove, amid the scent of fresh varnish and sea brine, bodies a fierce rebuttal to doubt. But seeds sown in soil of expectation take root slowly, insidiously. As autumn deepened, the conflicts layered like the city's strata. Roman beneath Gothic, medieval under modern. Elena, true to form, resurfaced not with drama but deception. A package arrived at La Serena. An envelope of glossy photos, Anastasia and Magnolia from the show, captioned with Elena's scrawl, "Careful love. She's playing the long game. Just like I taught her." Enclosed was a contract draft. Magnolia's name beside Elena's, dated months before their reconciliation, for that damned collaboration. Anastasia's world tilted. She confronted Magnolia in the studio. Photos fanned across the workbench like accusations. "You said you rejected her. Twice. But this? This looks like negotiation." Magnolia's face drained of color, hands trembling as she snatched the papers. "I did reject her. This was her fantasy, her forgery. Anna, please." "Proof," Anastasia demanded, voice a whip crack. "Or it's over." The ultimatum hung, heavier than the marble block Magnolia had been chiseling. A form half emerged, woman reaching for phantom lover. What followed was a descent into verification's hell. Magnolia produced emails, timestamps aligning with her story. Polite declines, Elena's escalating pleas turning petulant. But one thread lingered, ambiguous. A late-night message from Magnolia. "Let's talk. For Anna's sake." Context. Elena had threatened to sabotage Anastasia's rising rep, whispering poison to gallerists about instability. "I was buying time," Magnolia explained, voice raw in the dim light of their kitchen, rain lashing the windows like judgment. "To protect you. From her, from my own cowardice." Tears carved paths down her cheeks, and Anastasia, torn between fury and fatigue, reached out, pulling her close. "No more secrets," she whispered. "We're in this fractured together." Forgiveness was a bomb, but betrayal's echo lingered, amplifying the external pressures. Victoria's visits multiplied, each laced with concerned counsel, invitations to family estates in La Rioja, hints at introductions to suitable heirs. "Darling, think of your future," she'd say over luncheons at Botafumeiro. Octopus glistening like unspoken bargains. Magnolia resisted, but the strain showed. In late nights at the studio, her sculptures growing sharper, more angular, voids deepening into abysses. Anastasia, too, faltered. A solo commission came, a mural for a Brooklyn nonprofit, pulling her back to New York for just 2 weeks. The distance yawned, a chasm Elena exploited with precision. Texts arrived during layovers. "Heard your solo. Room for old friends." Anastasia blocked her, but the isolation gnawed. Nights in a sterile Airbnb echoing with what-ifs. Reunited at El Prat Airport, their embrace was desperate, lips meeting in a kiss that bridged oceans. But the rift had widened, microfractures in their foundation. The true high tide crashed in December, under a sky bruised purple over Montserrat's peaks. They'd escaped to the monastery for solace, hiking the craggy paths where saints once sought visions. But Victoria ambushed them there. Arriving by chauffeured Mercedes, her presence a papal decree amid the pilgrims. "We need to discuss Magnolia's inheritance," she announced over herbal tea in the refectory, eyes bypassing Anastasia. "The vineyard requires stability. Marriage, heirs, traditions that endure." Magnolia's voice was steel. "Mother, I'm not a vessel for your dynasty. Anastasia is my choice. End of story." Victoria's smile was glacial. "Choice? Or rebellion? I've indulged your inclinations. But this American fling? It's costing you everything." She slid documents across the table. Trust clauses, disinheritance veiled as prudence. "Sign and keep your allowance. Or persist and fund your folly alone." The betrayal cut deepest from blood. Magnolia's hands shook, crumpling the papers. "You'd trade your daughter for decorum?" Anastasia interjected, rising like a storm. "Love isn't a ledger, Victoria. It's the only inheritance worth claiming." Victoria's exit was frost, but the damage lingered. On the drive back, silence reigned, broken only by the wail of wind through the Sierra. "She doesn't define us," Anastasia said, but Magnolia's grip on the wheel whitened. "She birthed me. That's definition enough." That night, in a Montserrat inn with walls thick as confessionals, the dam broke. Magnolia wept, confessions spilling. Years of hiding of art as armor against a family's expectations. I fear I'll lose you to this. To her shadow. Anastasia held her, heart aching with recognition, the mirror of her own Elena-haunted doubts. Then we fight, she vowed. Not against each other, but for us. From those ashes rose resilience. They rejected the vineyard's chains, channeling fury into a new project. A public installation in the Parc de la Ciutadella, Unbound Legacies. Anastasia's murals wrapping Magnolia's forms, celebrating queer lineages amid the park's pagan oaks. Crowds gathered not just for beauty, but the humanity it evoked. Stories of chosen families, of love-defying ledgers. Yet climax brewed in quiet subversion. Victoria, unyielding, leveraged her network. Whispers to funders, delays in permits. Elena, scenting opportunity, allied subtly, her anonymous tip to a tabloid framing their work as scandalous agitprop. Backlash swelled. Vandalized sketches, cancelled talks. Anastasia, ever the fighter, rallied allies. Queer collectives from Sitges to NYC, turning attack into amplification. The breaking point came on New Year's Eve. Fireworks bursting over the harbor like defiant stars. At a solidarity rally in Placa, Catalunya, Magnolia took the stage, voice amplified over the crowd's roar. My mother taught me legacy is blood. But you've shown me its heart. She pulled Anastasia on stage, their hands clasped under the pyrotechnic rain. This woman saved me from my own chains. Love like ours? It's the revolution. Victoria watched from the shadows, face unreadable. Later, a letter arrived, not ultimatum but olive branch. I was wrong. Come home. Bring her. No fanfare, just the crack in armor that comes with witnessing truth. As 2026 dawned, they stood on that Costa Brava balcony, waves a symphony below. Betrayal had forged them. Elena's games, Victoria's grip, into something unbreakable. Humanistic in its imperfection, their love was no fairy tale, but a testament that from enmity's arms grace could emerge, tender and tenacious. Spring unfurled in Barcelona like a long-withheld sigh. Azaleas exploding in the labyrinthine gardens of Montjuic, mirroring the cautious bloom in Anastasia and Magnolia's world. Victoria's letter had been no panacea. Reconciliation was a slow thaw, marked by stilted calls and a tentative visit to the vineyard, where rows of tempranillo vines whispered of roots too deep to uproot overnight. But it was progress, a humanistic pivot from fracture to fragile alliance. She's trying, Magnolia said one evening, as they picnicked under the plane trees of Passeig de Gracia, prosciutto and figs scattered on a blanket. For me. Maybe for us. Anastasia nodded, popping a manchego cube, her fingers brushing Magnolia's in casual intimacy. At 29 now, the edges of her grief had softened. The freckles across her nose seemed less like battle scars, more like constellations guiding her home. Trying's enough. For now. Their eyes met, brown to green, and in that gaze lingered the depth of what they'd weathered. The betrayals that had nearly unmade them, now alchemized into empathy. Their art evolved in tandem, a romantic dialogue etched in public spaces. The Ciutadella installation drew pilgrims of its own, young lovers tracing the mural's interlocking hands, elders nodding at sculptures evoking lost eras of hidden desires. A documentary crew from PBS caught wind, trailing them for weeks, cameras capturing Anastasia's deft strokes on a El Raval wall, Magnolia's chisel biting into stone under the Ebro's sun. It's not just about us, Anastasia told the lens, paint smudged on her cheek. It's about saying we're here. Whole. Human. But peace, in a life laced with drama, was ever provisional. Elena's shadow, though faded, proved persistent. Word came via a mutual acquaintance, a gallery whisper that she'd relocated to Valencia, curating a redemption show of overlooked talents, her invites laced with subtle digs at rivalries unresolved. Anastasia laughed it off over dinner at Tickets, molecular gastronomy bursting like ironic fireworks. Let her curate ghosts. We're living flesh and blood. Magnolia's smile was tighter, her fork pausing midair. She's not done. I know her type, obsessive like a bad abstract that won't resolve. Indeed, a week later, an email pinged Anastasia's inbox, an offer for a solo in Valencia, nostalgic nod to our Seville days. Attached, sketches Elena claimed as collaborative inspirations, Echoes of Anastasia's old work, repurposed without credit. Rage simmered, but they strategized with the maturity betrayal had bought. No confrontation, instead a countermove. They pitched a joint retrospective to the Fundatio Joan Miro, Enemies to Eternities, framing their arc as narrative gold. Miroa's surreal terraces with their labyrinth views over the harbor became their canvas. Anastasia's emotional sprawl in vibrant inks, Magnolia's structural poise in polished bronze. Acceptance came swiftly, the director citing the raw humanity of your evolution. Preparation was a whirlwind of emotion. Late nights in the Miroa's sun-baked ateliers blending into lovers' quarrels and reconciliations. One dusk as they unpacked crates amid olive groves, conflict crested anew. Not from Elena but within. Anastasia, exhausted from a grant rejection, too sentimental, the letter sneered, lashed out. Your structures hold it all together, don't they? While mine bleed out on the page. Magnolia set down her hammer, sweat beading on her brow. And your bleeds? They give mine breath. Anna, we're not opponents anymore. The argument dissolved into tears, then tenderness, bodies entwined on a dropcloth, the Montjuic cable car humming overhead like a distant lullaby. I forget, Anastasia whispered, tracing Magnolia's collarbone. How far we've come. Elena's intrusion was inevitable, a dramatic flourish in their unfolding drama. She crashed the preview dinner at the Miro, uninvited elegance in a crimson gown that screamed provocation. Ladies, she toasted, glass raised amid the clink of crystal and Catalan toasts. To old flames and new forgeries. Anastasia, your evolutions. Inspired. Though I see my touch in those swirls. The room hushed, donors shifting uncomfortably. Magnolia's jaw set, but Anastasia, transformed by love's forge, rose, voice steady as the sea beyond. Inspired? By your games, yes. But this. She gestured to the installations, shadows dancing in the twilight. This is mine. Ours. Built from the ruins you left. Cheers to walking away. Elena's facade cracked just a hair, eyes flickering with something like regret or envy. She departed with a murmur of touché. But the encounter lingered, a final exorcism. Later, alone on the terrace, Anastasia and Magnolia watched fairies slice the water, lights twinkling like promises kept. You were magnificent, Magnolia said, pulling her close. My warrior poet. Summer brought culmination. The show's opening, a cascade of acclaim that rippled to the New York Times. A lesbian odyssey in stone and stroke. Victoria attended, arm linked with Anastasia's in a gesture of quiet surrender. Her approval a nod over Sherry. You've built something enduring. I'm proud. Tears welled, unspoken histories mending in the moment. Yet the true climax was private. An emotional apex on that fateful Costa Brava cliff. Returning for the anniversary of their first unguarded night, they hiked to the balcony overlook, the Mediterranean a sapphire expanse under relentless sun. Wind whipped their hair. Anastasia's waves tangling with Magnolia's straight fall, as confessions flowed freer than the waves below. I betrayed myself first, Magnolia admitted, voice nearly lost to the roar. Hiding from you, from us, out of fear she'd win. Anastasia cupped her face, thumbs brushing away salt not from sea. And I betrayed trust, doubting when you deserved faith. But look, we're here. Whole. Their kiss was the story's heart. Not fireworks but hearthfire warm sustaining, laced with the drama of survival. No grand gestures, just the humanistic truth. Love as verb, as choice renewed daily. As they descended the path, hands linked, Barcelona's spires a distant silhouette, Anastasia felt the arc complete. From Elena's game to Magnolia's grace, betrayal had been the cruel teacher, forging a romance romantic in its realism, deep, flawed, profoundly American in its defiant optimism, even on Spanish soil. They were no enemies now but allies in eternity, their story a testament that walking away could lead not to ruin, but to the arms that heal. In the years that followed, their legacy grew. Books penned, lectures given, vines reclaimed in Rioja with Victoria's blessing. But the core remained that cliffside vow, emotional evergreen. Love, they'd learned, wasn't won in grand betrayals or climactic storms, but in the quiet human act of staying, of seeing the other's full spectrum, and choosing every dawn to paint the canvas together.